Hi folks, this is one of my occasional Living Gestalt podcasts, video casts, and I thought I'd say something timely about authenticity and the virus. I'm actually here in the north of England. You can see behind me there's a lake. This is called the Lakes District. Very beautiful little stream we're next to, so you can hear bubbling away. So, yes, this is some of what I'm doing during this time of being relatively locked down. I'm here in England visiting my son, who's a paramedic with the London Ambulance Service. So he's at the front line of a lot of what's going on. And we're spending some of his time off taking hikes in this beautiful area. Seems like a good thing to do, not just stay indoors. So yes, this is a very dramatic time in the world, and there's serious things to be concerned about, of course. The dangers of the virus, of spreading the virus, of catching the virus. And although the majority of people are okay when they get the virus, there's a minority that aren't, and obviously that's a lot of concern. So I think that's something to be taken seriously. What I also observe in friends, clients, the people around me, is that people, are very afraid, and what I see is that a lot of very deep fears are being stimulated by this situation. Not just the fear of the virus itself and the sensible dangers that, sensible precautions that need to be taken in the face of the danger, but a lot of deeper fears, which is understandable. Any kind of crisis tends to do that, tends to bring up people's deeper fears, right down to the fear of death. And from an existential point of view, from a psychotherapeutic point of view, there's a lot of value in looking at those deeper fears because they give us a sense of our place in life and what is it that I'm doing, whether there be kind of the really profound spiritual questions of what's the purpose of all this, what's it all for, or whether it be kind of psychological questions of what is my place in the world and what is the meaning of existing or not existing. So I think that there's a lot of useful internal exploration that can come out of this. I think that there's less usefulness in focusing too much on the external circumstances, which are simply as they are. We've got a world pandemic, and people need to be careful. Societies need to be careful. Governments need to be careful. So, that's the basic fact of it. Wash your hands. Above and beyond that, what is really important is addressing these fears, both internally, what comes up for people, and also interpersonally, how the people around me are feeling, and how I can support that, or how that impacts on me. Often when one person's afraid, then it triggers fear in another person, and fear can catch on like a wildfire, such as the phenomena in Australia and other places, even here in the UK, of people buying a lot of toilet paper. That's fear-based. So the fear of one person of scarcity catches on, and someone else is afraid, and it runs through society like that. So I can understand those fears, and what's important to me as a therapist is that people address those fears directly, or they get the support to. Now, of course, a lot of people don't, so that they engage in fearful behavior. As a therapist, though, I want to penetrate deeper, and of course, on a social level, I'd like to see a lot more support available for people's fears. At the moment, mostly what seems to be happening is those fears get exacerbated in some form or another. So, another thing that I wanted to say about this situation is that the issue of authenticity, I think, is still very relevant here. And the way that I would frame that is, what is each person's authentic response to this crisis that we're facing? So that might seem a strange kind of question, or a peripheral question, not so important. Who's got the luxury of considering the idea of authenticity in the face of a dangerous situation? Nevertheless, I do actually think that it's important because, well, to state the obvious, we're all individuals, and each person has their own unique needs and own unique response to being in a crisis. And what I observe, another thing that I observe, is that a lot of people like to tell other people what to do in this situation. Now, of course, if you're a minister in the health department in any country, you're going to be telling people what to do, and I think that's fair enough. What I see, though, is that some people get very self-righteous about what's the correct action in the face of the virus. And whilst the basics are very clear, wash your hands, keep some distance, be careful about contagion, above and beyond that, there's a lot of, I think, control that goes on. People, out of fear, controlling themselves or wanting to control others. And I've noticed that, people have a range of responses to this situation. A friend was telling me about a friend of his who was kind of lecturing him about, that he shouldn't see any clients face to face because it's dangerous. But then she went out and played with a soccer team. So, each person's got their own way of putting together the best response. And moving aside from kind of political issues or kind of mass health issues, I'm interested in the individual issue of, well, what's the right response for you? What's the right response for me? So I want to find out each person's authenticity and support them to explore that, whether it be their individual fears and the things that for each individual make them feel safe within this situation. So for me, there's a government warning here, do not travel unless it's necessary. Well, I made a decision to travel up from London to the Lakes District. I don't think it was really particularly dangerous. We stopped at a petrol station once and got petrol. And here we are in nature, which from my point of view is probably a safer place to be. But, a number of people were saying to me, oh, well, you shouldn't be traveling. So, as a Gestaltist, of course, I'm wary of the shoulds, of anybody telling anybody else what they should do. And again, whilst there's clear baseline about, well, you should be washing your hands and things like that, I think that there's a lot of different ways that people put together what safety means, what personal safety, what social safety means in these kind of circumstances. So I'm going to be voting for each person's authentic version of this, within reasonable social bounds. I want to keep saying that as a caveat. However, given the reasonable bounds of respectful and appropriate behaviour in the face of a pandemic, what is the authentic response? Because I think that that's what it comes down to, is for each person what their choices are. And that's another existential notion, is given the limitations that life brings to me, what sort of choices do I make? And so I really emphasize this question of choicefulness, of what are my choices, so I don't feel like I'm trapped in a prison, so that I submit to the distancing which might be required, and yet I don't get into resentment, or I don't get into too much fear, and also paying attention to what's right for other people. I don't want to tell other people how they should spend this time, and I also don't want to be told how I spend this time. I want to find out what's right for me within the appropriate limitations. So, I think these questions of authenticity and how we live out Gestalt is also very appropriate in these times, even more so in times of pressure and emergency and this kind of fear that goes around. So, I guess the last thing I'd like to say is about the fear. I invite you to look at how you deal with fear and how you process fearful situations and what's familiar to you. For all of us, well, most of us, we've had very fearful situations in our life, and often as a child, because You know, the world can be a scary place for children, especially if adults aren't always taking the best care of us. In those circumstances, we experience fear, and we also learn certain ways to be with that fear. So in terms of self-awareness, then I invite you to notice that. What's your, as we say in Gestalt, your field context? So for me, my father, sometimes he would, when he would get moody, which was not infrequently, he would drive the car very fast. And I could be scared as a kid, but I somewhere made a decision to be excited and imagine I was in a racing car. So sometimes my response to danger is to feel exhilarated rather than constrict myself, which, is very kind of liberating in a sense. And of course, it also means that I can sometimes take risks without thinking about them. So, these are things that I notice in my response to the current crisis, and which I pay attention to, both in terms of my habitual patterns of response and what kind of choices I can make here. So, authenticity in times of crisis. That's, I think, a very useful question to pay attention to. Signing off, I'll talk with you soon.